Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining today's conversation. I hope everyone can hear me. Am I audible? Great. Thank you all for joining today's conversation on Sudan. My name is Janet. I work with Africans for the Horn of Africa, an initiative that is a coalition of initiative including International Refugee Rights Initiative, African Leadership Center, Pan African Lawyers Union, and African uh, and Atrocities Watch Africa. As such, we are pleased to be hosting the conversation with the strategic initiative. We are glad to be hosting this conversation with the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa and the African Center for Justice and Peace Studies. Tonight's conversation will be assessing the current situation in Sudan and also charting pathways for peace. We urge the people of Sudan not to be discouraged because of the 1 year of war. Let us rekindle the fire of revolution. The people of Sudan hold the real power, and we, your brothers and sisters in the region, will continue to support a return to a peace in Sudan. With me, we are joined with the conversation today will be moderated with two co-hosts. That is Hamid and Mazal. Uh, but first, I will introduce a representative of Africans for the Horn of Africa, who will take us through the work that Africans for the Horn of Africa has done throughout the year in Sudan. Welcome, Shuvai Nyoni. Shuvai, could you please accept the mic? Okay, as we wait for Shuvai to accept the mic, I will I will call in a representative from the African Center for Justice and Peace to kindly tell us about the work of African Center for Justice and Peace as we wait for Shuvai to join.
Hello, thank you, Janet, for the initiative, and I hope you are hearing me.
Yes.
So, the African Center for Justice and Peace study is a Sudanese non-profit, non-governmental organization established in 2009 to address a gap in human rights movement in Sudan. What we do, we have several programs. Advocacy had a human rights monitoring program. The ACGBS human rights monitoring program is dedicated to documenting urgent cases of individual at risk and emergence situation of concern throughout Sudan. ACGPS also has legal program, in-depth research and analysis on key legal issues in Sudan, including Sudanese compliance with international and regional human rights community. The center provides much needed research and analysis on human rights situation in Sudan, and its intervention are valued by human rights defenders and policymakers at both regional and international level. So the center contribution to this activity is part of contribution to stop the war and draw the attention of international community to the tragedy in Sudan. And today we are facing, like this is a 1 year past now for the war. And we hope this conversation be very rich by those who are speaking now. Thank you for the floor.
Thank you, Salma. Uh, I think Shuvai is on now.
Hello, can you hear me, Janet?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful, excellent. Very sorry for the technical issue. Good evening and good afternoon to all the people who have joined this very important space as we commemorate, but also talk about the really the really complex and difficult past 12 months that Sudan and the people of Sudan have faced as a war that is not of the making of Sudanese citizens, has dragged on and has in fact intensified. My name, as Janet explained, is Shulai Busman Nyoni. I'm the Executive Director of the African Leadership Center, which is part of the initiative that we call the Africans for the Horn Initiative, that is co-hosting this space this evening today with our colleagues and partners from CIHA and ACJPS. Just to say a little bit about Africans for the Horn, it is an initiative, a coalition of Pan-African organizations whose main focus is building solidarity actions for citizens from countries across the continent, um, uh, to shed light on the crises and conflicts that are affecting our continent, but in particular in the Horn. We're really pleased to be collaborating with CIHA and ACJPS this evening, as Janet already outlined, as we have continued to do over the last year. In fact, from the moment that we first heard and first received news from colleagues who were directly experiencing the conflict as it began. And we have continued to watch with great dismay the continued sound and sight of the impact of the guns and the drones, which are yet to be silenced. We will hear this evening from colleagues who are deeply immersed on a day-to-day basis, responding to the conflict and the crisis. But we continue to stand with the people of Sudan, to remind you that there are people standing with you, working in different ways to shed light, to bring attention to the situation that many times has seemed and felt as though it has been forgotten by the world as other events take precedence and receive more attention. We continue to be persuaded and encouraged by the fire we saw in the people of Sudan on the streets during the revolution. And we really continue to have faith that the results and that revolution would not be stolen from the people of Sudan, but also future generations. We believe the people of Sudan hold real power, and we, your brothers and sisters in the region, will continue to support a return to peace in Sudan. And so, Janet, I'm not sure whether I hand over now to the moderator or back to you. But thank you so much, everyone who has joined, and we really look forward to your participation as we continue to shed light and remind the rest of our brothers and sisters on the continent about what continues to happen in Sudan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shuvai. Thank you for the encouraging words. And I'll now open the floor to our co-hosts. Hamid and Mazal can take over the conversation now.
Thank you so much, Janet, and thank you so much for organizing this space and for inviting me to co-moderate it with Malaz. Just to set the scene for our listeners today, more than 1 year since it started, the war in Sudan is rapidly growing, more complex, and drawing in a larger proportion of the population in Sudan. as both the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese Armed Forces resort to mobilizing civilian populations, often along ethnic lines, and continue to fight without an end or an end to this war in sight. Overall, it's a very grim picture that is not being talked about or supported in any way. Horrifying numbers of killed and injured civilians, grave human rights violations, disturbing sexual assaults, and mass destruction is what's happening in Sudan. In so many ways, it's been described as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, the highest level of conflict displacement in the world currently, and it's soon to be the world's largest food crisis. Millions of people in Sudan face daily challenges to survive the fighting. Coupled with blockages of and distribution of humanitarian assistance and aid to citizens. The conflict has triggered mass displacement. The International Organization for Migration, IOM, has reported over 10 million people being forced to flee their homes, both internally and externally. Half of the population, that's 25 million people, are in need of humanitarian assistance. Roughly 80% of hospitals in Sudan are inoperable or inaccessible. 19 million children are out of school. There's a huge food security crisis, as mentioned earlier, with 18 million Sudanese people facing hunger, and out of those, 5 million are facing starvation in the month to come. So it's a looming famine is in the making in the next few months, and despite the crisis, or the catastrophe rather, in Sudan being one of the largest humanitarian situations in the world globally at the moment, Sudan remains significantly underreported and ignored by the international community. And the humanitarian response is gravely inadequate, and what's available or what has been made available already is struggling to reach those who need it the most, due to the serious challenges in accessing citizens who need it, as both warring factions have been obstructing aid distribution, and they have also been using humanitarian corridors in political ways, and so on. This was just to set the scene. I will now pass. And I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Hamid Khalafallah. I'm a researcher and policy analyst, currently pursuing a PhD degree on political transitions in Africa at the University of Manchester in the UK. I will pass over to Malaz to introduce herself and to invite our first speaker. Over to you, Malaz.
Hello, good evening. I'm Malaz. I'm a journalist from Sudan. Also, I'm a researcher and human rights defenders. Thank you for Africa. Also, thank you for the platform of Africa Center for Justice and Peace Studies for hosting these conversations and providing the opportunity and organizing these discussion sessions. I'm really happy for this inviting to be co-moderated this space with Hamid. Also, thank you all of you, the speakers and audience, also who has joined and attending and participating in this space, which we consider it's important to communicate and share information. Also, discussions with our speakers are interested about the situation in Sudan after a year of war. Thank you so much. So I think we have to begin the discussions. But if the platform allow us to give them like 2 minutes to enter the space, because I think they are not here. I can't see Dr. Hala.
Hala has not joined
Although
yet. We can start with Hajar.
Okay, no problem. We can start with Hajar. Hello, good evening, Hajar. As Sudanese use networking, firstly as a cultural activist and peace advocate. So the Sudan's youth network have been providing much needed humanitarian assistance, including food, water, medicine, and fuel, even fuel, to the people in need. Youth activists help people fleeing the violence, connect with drivers and available vehicles also. And then the activists set up the improvised emergency room in public space such as school and clubs to help those injured. So could you speak to us on the daily to daily operation of the groups? Let us talk more about are there any assistance or support from humanitarian organization or even international community in support for your works? And thank you.
Thank you so much, Malaz. Thanks, everyone. So, yeah, I'm Hajar. I'm a culture and peace advocate. I'm also a communication specialist. So, that's briefly me. To answer your question, yes, actually, the emergency rooms is fascinating. Like the rooms and the members, they do an incredible effort in responding to the crisis. And often, when I'm asked this question, I'm not sure how to respond, like how elaborate and how detailed I should be. Everyone knows what the emergency room is doing. However, it's really incredible work, so it's always good to give a background about how it started and how it evolved. So the emergency rooms, it actually when the war happened, it started in like small WhatsApp groups in neighborhoods, people checking on each other and kind of connecting for supplies because at the time everyone was terrified. They just needed information. We just needed to connect with each other. So it started like this, and then it evolved to kind of later become more structured and also given the fact that emergency room were initially resistance committees because they're also resistance committees were based on the neighborhoods. So the resistance committees already had a clear structure and practices system in place. So this system helped the emergency room to actually respond effectively and quickly. So, also within the work, with the conflict still happening, emergency room, they started sharing challenges and lesson learned, and they started to coordinate. So that's why their impact is really incredible now. From my experience, I worked on documenting the emergency room's effort. And it's good to mention that not only emergency rooms, but there are other initiatives that evolved. For example, in Medani, before the conflict in Medani, there was a Mataris group. Mataris was actually a group of theater professionals and actors and filmmakers. They were in Medani and they started doing theater and shows just kind of to reflect who they are. I remember talking to one of them and they told me that we don't want to be IDBs. We don't want to lose our identity as theaters and as a theater as professionals and filmmakers. So it's not only about the need for the basic services. It's also about the identity and the fact that you lost your life and your day-to-day work, and you still need to remind yourself of who you are. So again, the emergency room experience is incredible, and their day-to-day work is different from one room to the other. For example, when I worked with the Halfa emergency room, they were actually working to support people fleeing the war from Sudan to Egypt. So they were just kind of providing day-to-day services and basic support of food, ensuring that it's wherever they are, it's the hygiene is good. And they used to provide this for maybe 2-3 days, maximum a week, and then or two, and then another group would come in. So on the other hand, in Kassala, the emergency room, they used to support IDBs. So that means they need to have more sustainable services, kind of having these. And they needed, of course, sustainable funds, but at the time it was only like solely donation. So it's different from an area to another. And even the mandate is different because we have volunteers and no hospital, for example, and no is in Umdurman, and they were trying their best to run the hospital. All volunteers, yeah. So All in all, their operations is different from day to day, but eventually they're all volunteers. They just wake up every day having the responsibility that those are people, those are Sudanese people. We need to support them. No one should suffer or be left behind. Regarding your follow-up question about the humanitarian organization, there is support, but as Hamid mentioned, it's not enough, and we need more funds. We need better coordination. It's not enough, and Sudanese people shouldn't be affected this much by the war. And for example, according to OCHA, the only INGO that provides bread was Human Appeal, and that's it. We don't have people that provide ready food. So on the other hand, in local initiatives, we have Hadrin, and Hadrin they've been providing ready to use food and with the kitchen idea. And for those who don't know, the kitchen idea is actually a place where in the neighborhood we have main kitchen for a whole neighborhood, and then people would just send donations, support, and then a group of volunteers, they would just make the food ready every day. Every day. Sometimes they don't have enough funds, so they stop, and other times they're trying their best just to continue. But again, the INGO, like for example, Hadirin initiative, it started way before the INGOs and the UN were able to intervene. So the thing about local initiatives like Hadirin and emergency room is that they are responsive, they are fast, and they're on the ground. They are there because they are the people affected themselves. And now we can see some support here and there, but it's also restricted with the organization's mandate and the procedures and how they can support, and also the security situation. So it's complex. There is support, but it's not enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hajer, for shedding light on the great initiatives on ground that Sudanese people, particularly youth groups, are pioneering and finding new ways, innovative ways to support themselves at the time when the international community is not being present on ground. Related to this, I want to bring in Lena Shibeka. And Lena, if you could tell us a little bit about, what other sorts of youth groups and youth organizing are we seeing after the war erupted to support the Sudanese people, but not only internally, but also externally outside Sudan, particularly in the diaspora. What are Sudanese people doing to support their own people who are trapped inside the war?
Thank you very much, Hamid, and thank you very much, Hajer, for saying all of these wonderful things. My name is Lena Shibeka, and I'm a master's student based in London. I'm studying human geography, and my dissertation is basically focused on studying the political geography of the Sudanese Revolution. So this is as you can imagine, it's a very emotional topic, especially in light of the recent war. Regarding your question, Hamid, I think it's very, very important, especially to look at what the Sudanese diaspora is doing and what are people outside of Sudan doing. For example, I know that there's a group of really active Sudanese youth here in London and outside of London who are actively coming together to organize and rallying to basically to bring to the international attention to the issue of Sudan, and like basically just raising awareness, because as much as it hurts me to say, but there aren't a lot of people within the international community. When I say people, I'm talking about the everyday people who don't know what's happening in Sudan and are unable to relate to it, especially in light of all the global conflicts and wars that is happening, especially with the situation with Palestine. So a lot of Sudanese youth are working hand in hand with UK-based activists and also UK activists, UK nationals, to bring to the forefront, the struggles of Sudan. And we've been organizing, not me personally, but an amazing group of other Sudanese people have been organizing this ongoing Sundays for Sudan protest and rally. So what they do is basically that everyone just protests and goes out to the street every Sunday to protest about the situation that is happening in Sudan, to bring more attention to it, and also to just provide a space for people to learn more about Sudan and then redirect them to all of the other local and international networks that are working towards raising funds and you know, just reaching out to the people in Sudan. Other than that, I mean, I would love to see more organized and more coordinated effort to, you know, to just structure this maybe even more. And it would be amazing to see, you know, groups in diaspora just being able to organize and also learn and benefit from the models of organizations that are grassroots and that we see in Sudan, because I think these are very interesting and models that we can learn a lot from. I would also like to take this space to mention to everyone that I am with a group of my friends. We're organizing a fundraiser and a panel discussion on Sudan that is going to be on the 1st of May here in London. Unfortunately, we're still working on it being live streamed, but we would love for anyone to join, especially if you're in London. If you're not, we'll try to live stream it so that everyone can participate and everyone can see what the diaspora is trying to do. And hopefully that will be also an opportunity to just connect bridges and be able to learn from each other. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lina, so much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the situation in Sudan these days, and also the needs of the share information about humanitarian needs and aids in Sudan. Also, Sudanese, even Sudanese inside Khartoum, Madani, and any conflict places. So I will go directly to invite Ms. Hala, the regional director of Sayha Network, to tell us more about the impact of the conflict on women and girls and the current interventions. So the war in Sudan has characterized as a war of women, and also the reports indicate that it's widespread use of gender-based violence, including but not limited to sexual violence, as the tools of the war subjects, and also as a means of supporting specific communities targeting by RSF and allied militias. Also, could you speak to the impact of the conflict in Sudan and girls? Do you hear
Thank
me,
you.
Ms. Hala?
Yes, I can hear you very well, Malas. Thank you very much, and thanks to to the host, African the Horn, colleagues Dismas and Stella, for the opportunity, and greetings to all the participants in this space. As you mentioned, you know, from the beginning, central into this war, the use of women bodies as a weapon of war, and that has been an issue that has been happening from day one. But even before that, I think what happened in this conflict is that the expansion of the war, outside of the boundaries of Darfur and Nuba Mountains into and outside of rural Darfur and rural parts of Sudan into urban setup has kind of showed us, the decades of suffering that women in rural areas in particular region of Sudan, primarily in Darfur and in Nuba Mountains, has been struggling with for literally over 20 years. So I'd just like to shed light on the fact that, we're not speaking about something that happened all of a sudden. You know, this war is an accumulation of decades of impunity and coexisting with atrocities and coexistence with injustice and with sequence of grievances, and turning a blind eye to what Sudanese civilians in several parts of Sudan has been struggling with. And I think what happened is that even post the revolution, the Sudan political elites, they kind of, being the military elites or even the civilian elites, they have chosen to bury their heads on the sand and not to look at the, at the gravity of the situation, at the, how grim the situation, across the country at the time when Bashir has fallen on April 11th. So I think that's really very, very important, in my view, to remind ourselves of, for 20 years, al-Bashir and the Janjaweed slash RSF militia, they have transformed, very peaceful, very productive communities in rural Darfur, very self-sufficient communities, into displaced and into people who are stripped out of, and particularly women, and farming communities. They were stripped out of their property and of their work. And right now we are seeing literally a deja vu of what happened in Darfur in Jazeera state, similarly, transferring peaceful communities, settlers, stable, who are self-sufficient, into displaced, and militarizing communities. And I think, on the situations of women and girls, which is, the manifestation of the crisis, it always reflects on the women's situations. It's a mirror of, of bad governance. It reflects on women, injustices and grievances. We can see it very, very clearly on women, and this is what happened. So, and I do remember very clearly when we were speaking about sexual and gender-based violence that has been happening in Darfur, at that point in time, in 2007, before the indictments, and we have been accused of lying, and right now in 2024, working with, with victims and survivors of sexual violence, still Sudan political elites, at both sides, they are still accusing human rights defenders and women activists of lying. That sexual violence prevalence is not as high, that women are not as exposed to torture and suffering. And but on the other hand, as someone who has been doing this work for a very long time, I'm very, very grateful, for the awareness of youth, and their enlightenment and understanding and courage as well, being at the front line, responding to the extreme and high prevalence of violence that's happening to women and girls, and themselves, the young women at the emergency rooms themselves are victims of violence. Many of them, they have been subjected to all forms of violations, especially those who are working in RSF controlled areas, but also those who are present in Sudan Armed Forces controlled areas, being in the surveillance or detained, but the situation of those who are working in RSF controlled areas much more dangerous. And we have recorded a number of cases of women at the front lines, women rights defenders who were themselves become victims. Either they got killed, or they were sexually assaulted, or they were exposed to other forms of torture, or they were enforced disappeared. So in addition to the high prevalence of sexual violence, which is it's becoming an everyday reality of women across the country at the moment in Sudan. Women were raped, even when they are en route, in traveling buses in between cities, especially in areas that very much dominated by the rebel support forces and by their affiliated militia. There is a number of incidents where women were raped by the side of the road. They were forced to get off the buses, and they were raped inside their homes. They were raped in front of their parents, raped in front of their children. Frontline workers, nurses, women street vendors, which is even difficult to track, the scale of sexual violence they are experiencing, let alone the profiling of women based on their, of their identity, and being targeted, by torture and other acts of humiliations. A friend of mine, she was, in Jazeera State, she was, begging the, the young soldiers, RSF soldiers, like telling him, my son, please do not take, this is the last amount of money that I have, and I'm really hoping to get out of here. And he told her, don't tell me, you are my son, I'm not your son, and I cannot look like you. Someone like you cannot have a son like me. So the level of blatant hate also, that's inflicted on women, it's quite significant. And the prevalence of misogyny and femicide as well, it's also quite significant. I'd also like to highlight that, all these nightmare, and all these horrific sequence of events are happening with complete lack of access to any form of protections or support. Women and little girls and communities are quite exposed to these brutalities in conflict areas. And in the states and territories where there is no conflicts, there is no service provision that can provide psychosocial support or access to health services, or the basic protocol that rape survivors are required to have, so it's a real struggle. And people at the front line, they understand this very well. There is a few incidents where young women took their lives, which is quite painful. Women, they are not even 20 years yet, they took their lives. Just sinking into this, pain and disparity with no one there to help them, and navigating a reality that doesn't even acknowledge their pain, and what they are going through. Social reality, cultural reality, and a political reality that does not acknowledge that women are getting hurt to that extent. You know, there is other issues in addition to sexual and gender-based violence. Of course, women are being enslaved. They were forced to do work for the militia, especially women who were at the peripheries of Khartoum. In Jazeera, it's also happening. They were forced to wash clothes. They were forced to carry heavy equipments. Some of our the groups that we work with, within in Umdurman, and I just don't want to mention the area, but they were women community leaders and elders in their 70s, and they were enslaved by the militia. They were forced to clean for them, cook for them, and then they would tell them that you're too old and too ugly for them to sexually assault them. So after they force them to do the heavy lifting and the heavy work, they will force them to dance. They will make them dance. They will make grandmothers in their 70s to dance. And then they will fire bullets on their heads. And after they get drunk, one of the women, she's diabetic, and it took enormous efforts to take her out. The little girls, the girls between the age of 10, all the way to 18, 16, and 17, who were exposed to the militia, the level of horror they had to live with is beyond anyone's imaginations. Abductions, camps of sexual slavery, specific locations were identified even, by communities and incorporated by some satellite images where they are used as hotspots for sexual slavery. That happened in Western Darfur. It's happening now in Al Jazeera. Forced marriage is quite prevalent. Forced pregnancy, because lack of access to sexual and reproductive health is also quite prevalent. And women had to navigate this in, as I said, in a society that even in the relatively safe territories, there is no recognition of what they need. There is no facilities where they can access. So it's really a gender crisis. It's absolutely a gender crisis. What's happening at the moment in Sudan, because it's civilian bodies, it's women bodies of all ages that are at the front line. It's a campaign of atrocity that's dedicated to torture women and girls. And this is happening everywhere across the country. And unfortunately, neither the narrative or the conversation about this conflict, it's or this war is reflecting that, nor there is any response in terms of protections or extending support that's currently happening. We really had to navigate a very, very difficult and complex environment that exceeds our capacity as women organization and exceeds the capacity of the other grassroots women organizations who exist on the grounds and the frontline workers, being in the emergency rooms and other forms of civil society. Yeah. Over to you, Malas. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hala, for shedding light on this gender crisis and that happens to the woman and little girl, unfortunately. Also about what sexual and physiological violations that happens daily to them. But in like 2 minutes, can you just speak or give us more information about some of initiatives that done by Saiha to address the situation of women as a regional director of Saiha Network?
So, as I said, it's quite overwhelming. And I think, we can only do so much, since the war started, we have built from scratch. That's not what used to be our work. We are an advocacy institution. We should be working on policy and rights, across the region. And we did some work in Darfur, for the past, I would say, 15 years or more. But it was mostly about, in a relatively stable environment, but to respond to that magnitude of crisis, it's something that we really have to learn from scratch, and it was very difficult. We found ourselves struggling, since April 15, because also, people would come to us, the earlier cases of sexual violence, and so the thing that we did at the beginning, is we tried as much as possible to secure the survivors, because we learned early on that, if a group of women, they are in specific locations, they were raped, and, earlier in the invasion, the pattern that we detect that earlier in the invasion, rape and gang rape, it happened in a massive scale. And this is why I keep saying that all the time, that sexual violence in conflict is not like a stray bullet. It's not a coincidence. It's a war strategy. It's intentional. It's planned. Otherwise, it wouldn't be over 75% of the cases of sexual violence are gang rape cases, and so trying to secure the survivors, trying to extend services and make sure that they are moved into a safe locations where they could, access at least a decent level of service. This is some of the things that we have done, and we continue to do. We're also very keen on building resilience among the grassroots groups and women organizations and frontline workers by extending support and enabling them to continue to do their work, because it's such a difficult environment, and people at the front line, they need a lot of support to hold their ground and to continue to sustain and be able to do their work. The other critical issue is mental health and psychosocial support, which is quite complex and difficult with the instability and the fact that everyone has been displaced. But that's part of supporting women organizations, supporting front line workers, also to extend that.
Hala, I think did we lose Hala? All right, I think we might have lost Hala. In the meantime, I think we can move on to Faisal Muhammad Saleh and allow me to not use any titles for everyone today. And thank you so much for joining us, prominent journalist and civil society activist and former minister for media and culture during the transitional period, Faisal Muhammad Saleh. Thank you for joining us. And I want to ask you, you know, so the world has shifted its attention from the war in Sudan. It was very short-lived attention, probably a few weeks before all global media outlets and so on moved on. And then with the war on Gaza in October erupting and so on, most of the attention has, gone there. And Sudan is undergoing the worst humanitarian crisis, and with the serious risks of famine threatening the entire population that's still in Sudan, mostly displaced in different states across the country and so on. Could you just speak a little bit to the current situation of the humanitarian, particularly on the humanitarian and human rights side in Sudan and what's happening on the ground, but also, why is this not on the media? Where is the media? Why is this not being reported?
Thank you, Hamid, and thank you, the African for the Horn of Africa. Thank you, all the people who are listening and following this conversation. My voice, is it good?
Loud and clear.
Sorry?
Very clear, thank you.
Okay. Fortunately, I'm now in the middle of a conference about the situation of media in Sudan and how can the international media help and assist. This is our second day in the conference, and tomorrow we are going for the final day in the conference. And most of the international media organizations and donors for media around the world are here in this conference, from CF1, the French, CFI, the French organization, MICT from Germany, Free Press from Netherlands, the European Union, the French Embassy, people from Netherlands, and different other organizations are here. And that we are discussing actually the situation of the media. How can we strengthen the media so that the media can be the voice of the voiceless people in Sudan who are suffering a lot? Let me just start by saying that's why the world attention have transferred to other areas of Sudan. And actually, that happens many times in the history of Sudan. And I think we used to lose the opportunities and the chances that available to us in a certain time. We do think that Sudan is a very strategic, important country in the world, and that is not true. We are part of the world somehow. Maybe our strategic position in the Horn of Africa, in the Eastern Africa, could give us some type of importance, but we actually overestimate that. The world is busy with what happened in Ukraine. Ukraine is part of Europe, is part of the Western Alliance, so it is far more important than Sudan for most of the Western countries, and those are the most the biggest international donors. The world also is busy with what's happening in Gaza. Israel is involved there. The United States, Germany, the other European countries somehow are involved there. and the humanitarian situation are covered by Arabic and international media. So people are still keeping attention on what's happening in Gaza. So that's why the Sudan now is not priority. There was a time when Sudan was on the top priority of the world, and I think the worrying parties, maybe even the civilian front, the people who are working on trying to solve the problem and the crisis in Sudan, I think they have wasted the time. And we should have learned that from Darfur war years, from the war in the south, when the people attention, the world attention was focused on Sudan for some time, and then they shifted to other areas of the world. Sometimes they lose hope of the Sudanese fighting parties, that they are not serious enough to find a solution to the situation, to the war in Sudan. And I think we need to work hard to keep the world attention on Sudan, or at least partially some of the attention of the world to what is going on in Sudan, especially the humanitarian situation. And I think Hala had shed light on that in details. The international organization, the international humanitarian organization have issued statements about the situation there, and they have actually put a very alarming statistics about the number of people who are facing famine in Sudan. Some of them are already facing famine, some are expected, and they are in millions. There are millions of people who fled their areas and their cities and their villages in Darfur areas, in Kordofan, and in central Sudan, in Jazeera, in White Nile, and in Sinnar areas. And some of them have went to neighboring countries, in Chad, in South Sudan, in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, and some of them have come here to Kampala. I'm now resident in Kampala. And there are also displaced people, internal displaced people, who went to either to North Sudan or to the cities of Eastern Sudan, in Kassala, Gadarif, Port Sudan. And really they are suffering. There is also alarming statistics about the situation of women and children in many areas of Sudan, where there is no enough medicine. The 80% of healthcare institutions, that including hospitals or small centers, now are out of service. All the doctors now are in the somehow the safe cities of North and Eastern Sudan. So the other people who are in Darfur or Kordofan or Central Sudan, they are lacking any health care of any type. And again, even those who, if you have money, if you still have money, sometimes you don't find enough food to buy using your money. So the situation is really alarming, and I think international humanitarian organizations have published many statements. They are talking to the world. Fortunately, I think that conference of Paris conference was somehow one step forward. And in this, as I said, difficult situation where the world is keeping attention on Ukraine and on Gaza, it was somehow a good step to gathering most of the European and Western countries, besides some Arab and regional powers, to participate in that conference. And they promised to provide Sudan, through the international humanitarian organizations, more than $2 billion. That is not, of course, still coming short of what the international humanitarian organization asked for, but it is, as I said, it's a good step that if they provide the international humanitarian organization by this fund, then there is the next step, that's to put pressure on the warring parties, that the SAF and the RSF, so that they can secure a way this humanitarian assistance reach the needy people in Darfur, in Central Sudan, in other areas of Sudan. And I think that should be linked directly to the expected negotiation in Jeddah Forum. Humanitarian access to humanitarian assistance should be one of the top on the agenda, beside protection of civilians. And I think, as I said, Hala have talked a lot about the situation, especially of women and children in this war-affected area. This also should be on the top of the agenda. Regarding the media, as I said, we are in the middle of a conference discussing that. The situation also is really terrible. The number of journalists who have fled Sudan is not a small number. Some of them are in Egypt. Some went to Chad, especially those who are from Darfur. Some crossed the border to South Sudan and then came to Nairobi and Kampala. We have also a large number of journalists here now in Kampala and in Nairobi. Some of them are in Ethiopia, and some fled who can manage to go to the Gulf states. Also, we have a huge number of journalists now in the Gulf states, in Saudi Arabia, in Emirates, in Qatar. And it is very difficult for them now to work inside Sudan, especially in the war-affected areas, areas should be covered by media. It is very difficult to work there. If you are working in areas controlled by SAF, that the Sudanese army, they want you to just respond and reflect their news and their opinions. And you are not allowed to try to be somehow objective, that you cover both opinions or you cover news from sources from the two sides. It's the same thing happened to people, journalists who are working in the areas controlled by RSF. And maybe the situation they are far more worse in these areas, simply because most of the areas controlled by RSF, there is no internet connection. So it is difficult for journalists to cover, to talk to people, and then to send their reports or their stories to media organization inside or outside Sudan. The number of journalists who are being killed in this war is about 8 of them. And 4 or 5 of them were killed while they are doing their mission as a journalist. The number of arrested journalists are actually exceeding day after day. Some of them are ordered to stop reporting or writing. Some of the even international satellite channels have denied access to work inside Sudan. And the situation, as I said, is worsening day after day. We are now discussing in this conference how to help the journalists inside and outside Sudan. We have established a unified forum, that's the Sudanese Media Forum. We have now about 29 member organizations, from media outlets and media organization, and some NGOs which are working for media training or defending media freedom, and they are working together. And we are appealing to the international donors to help the Sudanese journalists individually or through this Sudanese Media Forum. The question of why even the international media is not covering Sudan is related to the same answer of, is Sudan, to what extent Sudan is important to the world. And that's why the Western media are concentrating on Ukraine and on Gaza. And I'm not blaming them, actually. They said, we are also at the civilian front. But by civilian front, I don't mean a certain organization, is Taqaddum or whatever it is. I mean all those civilians who are against the war, either they are joining a coalition or joining a certain organization or not. Somehow they should coordinate their efforts. They should work together somehow against the war. And I think this is now the priority. They should keep their differences to the next step. When we are talking about what is going to happen after the war, how to form the documents, or even the shape of the transitional period, that could be a perfect time if we have different views and opinions. But to stop the war, and I think we should all come together and put our hands together to do our efforts all we can to stop this war. And I think this is now the priority of this time. And there are some efforts, but still they are not successful enough. And I think this is when we talk about international pressure on the government, they are also looking for what we are doing now. Are we also putting pressure? Are we working inside and outside Sudan? Are we talking about what is happening in Sudan? Are we reflecting the suffering of the people in Sudan? And that is a very important role that should be played by us. And then we can ask the international community to do its role. I hope that I have answered some of your questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers who shared different perspectives on what's happening now on ground in Sudan, on the ground, and also what's happening outside vis-a-vis the ongoing war. And in the next round of questions, I want to go back to each one of you just for a 2 minutes intervention, please, on the outlook, the future, and what should we expect next, also from different angles, and then we will open it up for questions from our listeners today. I will go back to you first, Faisal. Just if you could very briefly, in a couple of minutes, speak to what are the solutions from your perspective. What should we see happening next? What does Sudan need now to elevate the suffering of the people in Sudan, but also to bring the war in Sudan back to the media and make sure that it gets the attention that it deserves. You have already alluded to some of this in your former answer, but if you would like to add anything just in a couple of minutes, please.
Well, I think there are many expected scenarios according to the situation in Sudan and what is going on now. And the most desirable, I think, scenario is reaching an agreement to cease hostilities and initiate a political dialogue leading to the resumption of the political process, ending the war and starting a new political process. This is the desirable and scenario. And unfortunately, there are many other scenarios on the table also, because simply the two parties who are now fighting inside Sudan seems not willing to go and sit on the table to negotiate. Both of them actually have different position. In some initiative, SAF have welcome to go there, and RSF denied and refused to join. And now, for the last maybe 3 or 4 months, RSF say that they are willing to negotiate, and SAF is actually not responding to that. And I think we need, as I said, more regional, local, and international pressure on the two sides so that they can sit and negotiate. If they don't do that, there are many other scenarios that are expected to happen in Sudan, unfortunately. One of them could maybe win the war, and this is a very dangerous scenario. If SAF actually succeeded in defeating RSF, I think we are going to expect to have a military dictatorship aligned with the far-right Islamist, radical Islamist. And if RSF somehow succeeded in defeating the army, and I think we are going to expect worse scenario than that. So both of them, if one of them defeated the other, we are not going to have what we expected, a peaceful and secured Sudan for the people of Sudan. There are other scenarios that total chaos is expected. The scenarios of what happened before in Somalia and what is happening now in Syria and Libya could happen in Sudan. That we may have many governments, that there is a government of what we used to say that the de facto government in Port Sudan, but we could have a government in Darfur, or maybe more than 2 governments in Sudan. So I think we should also join again, as I said before, we should join again our hands, all the efforts we have, and we should be open with our African and Arab neighbors that should join us and the international community to put pressure on the two sides so that they can sit and negotiate for cessation of hostilities and ceasefire. And then after that, the door should be open to the civilian forces to discuss about the future of Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faisal. Hal, if I can go to you next. You know, above all, this has been a war on women, and they have been evidently the most impacted by this. So they have to be part of the solution. From your perspective, what's the outlook on the role of women, Sudanese women, in peace and security? What needs to be done to make sure that women are at the heart of the conversation and are creating the solution and creating the next chapter in Sudan?
Thank you, and I apologize. I disappeared all of a sudden. My phone died. So this is completely a new reality, that Sudanese are living in, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I think it's important for the political elites, for the military, to acknowledge the fact that this is absolutely a new reality. Sudan has went through pockets of war. Absolutely, most of those wars were fought at the peripheral territories. It mostly affecting communities in rural Sudan. The central into people who were really kind of they were part of these wars were the elites of Sudan,
Hamid, can you hear
and
me?
not necessarily when I say elites, I don't. It's not necessarily geographical, because even people from the periphery, they become part of, of power structure. They become part of the elites, and we have so many of those in Sudan. But overall, the communities that were living in urban centers, they kind of sustained their position for a very long time, despite the horrific situations that's happening around them. And so politics was, it's at the center was mostly, it was civil politics. At the peripheries, politics has transferred long time ago into war and armed conflict. And right now, where the war is actually erupted at the heart of Sudan, there is different and multiple scenarios. But, in my view, I think we cannot assume that this is, this is politics as usual, or it can be resolved by the usual models. That's or how things typically happen. It's like having a transitional government, that will lead into elections, and I think we really have to be more open and more accommodating for different scenarios, and for also to open the political sphere for, for diverse population, because I also think that, I don't think Sudanese at this point, they are going to, especially, and we're learning, I've been speaking to a lot of women around the continent whom their countries has been through civil wars, and how they navigate, the post-conflict realities, and how they came out of the war situation, so I definitely think that there will be a very strong desire of Sudanese to have a voice in terms of how their countries should be ruled after all this suffering. I think we have a very serious generational issue. 70% of Sudan are young people, 50% of them are women, and I think there is a need that the political sphere should be populated with new actors, and actors who can actually carry the responsibility and the burden of reconstructions, and of the post-conflict era further. I think that it's really very important to start thinking out of the box, and to start, speaking to people at a broader level. I don't think there is a ready-made recipe at this point. But the most important thing that we need now, we definitely need cessation of hostilities. We need protection, and very serious and comprehensive protection strategies. I think in 2019, we have compromised, by accepting to repeal the UNIMED mission. Was the UNIMED is the UN African Union mission, which was based in Darfur, and I think it was a reckless decision. That's currently not only the people in Darfur are paying the price of that. I think across Sudan, we paid the price of that, because we allow that to happen in a region that's extremely tense, militarized, and the conflict and atrocities was ongoing, yet a decision was made to repeal the mission, and it was replaced by a mission that has a very limited and narrow mandate, and was the issue of protection of civilians was not central into its mandate, and has very minimal resources. So I think the issue of protection is central. Cessation of hostilities is extremely important. And then the whole issue of the security sector, and the negotiation around the security sector reform, and the whole issue of disarmament and demobilization. So there is a very complex process
If I
ahead
may
of
ask you
us.
to wrap up,
Yes.
please.
I mean, I am just, I think I'm very done. I think when it comes specifically about your questions, I think it's critical the time that, the 40% and 20% and 30% in terms of engaging women, I don't think that will work, in creating actual transformation in Sudan. I think women should be part of the analysis, in their diversity, because women are very diverse and they have political agency, and they represent different positions and different views. But ultimately, as I said, it's definitely critical to have new players engage in the process of of conflict transformations in Sudan. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Hala. Next, if I can go to Hadir. Hadir, if you could just share in 2 minutes, you have been speaking and have also been working with youth groups on ground, resistance committees, emergency response rooms, and so on. Are they part of the conversation? Are they part of discussions about, what happens next, ending the conflict, and so on? And if not, what needs to be done to bring them on board? Are the platforms open for them or not?
Thank you so much, Hamid. There are discussions about how to strengthen youth participation and how they can better support the ongoing negotiations and so on. So, a number of young men and women, they're trying to kind of form new networks and coalitions here and there. However, we always end up finding youth kind of left behind, even if they are involved. There's just kind of this very light involvement just to tick the box that we involved youth, but we're hopeful and youth are trying their best. And all in all, what I could just say to regarding strengthen youth participation in the ongoing crisis response is that we need to strengthen advocacy, and advocacy in terms of great campaigns that actually results in policies, new policies that would support people on the ground in Sudan. For example, we had the borders between Sudan and Chad. They're closed every now and then, and we still don't know if they're open or not for humanitarian aid. So the situation also for refugees outside Sudan is also terrible, especially in Egypt, for example. The residency cards and everything is a complicated process. So when we're saying advocacy campaigns, we're just looking for advocacy campaigns that's so strong that would change policies that would support Sudanese people. And another thing about participation also would support youth is creating platforms that would help them raise their voices. And I'm here on the ground. I feel it's too much. Like youth are working on the ground. They're trying to be here and there. So any support from is highly appreciated. I also want to share that a number because the issue is that the youth voices are not heard is of course because of media, and Mr. Faisal was talking about this and elaborated a lot. But the thing is, we don't have enough platform for youth to actually share their concerns and their point of views. And the thing is, youth, they have very creative ideas and ways to participate in and help with the ongoing crisis. Before I wrap up, I just want to share that we documented 4 emergency room work on the ground. We have 4 short films. I'll just make sure to send them here in the comment or maybe share them on my profile. But all in all, I really hope that youth can be supported so they can further participate in the ongoing negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hadir. It would be brilliant if you could share the links in the comments of this space so that our listeners could access it. Last but not least, I will go to Lena before we open up for questions. And if you want to ask a question, please make sure that you join the queue to ask a question to our speakers today. Lena, just very lastly, you have spoken about the diaspora networks and what they have been doing for Sudan. What needs to be done to connect these networks with people on the ground, or are they already connected well enough, and so on. But also the other side of the question is what also needs to be done to build these regional and global diaspora networks. We have seen how obviously still falling short, but there's a lot of solidarity networks developing to support people in Gaza. So, you know, what can we do to do the same for Sudan? Over to you.
Thank you very much, Hamid. I would just like to start by saying that I completely agree with everything that Hajar said, and I think that is actually the key to also being able to involve the diaspora much. I think, first of all, there's a before like say what I think about the issue, the question of the diaspora. I think there's a clear politics of race and social and political identities that have been pushing out Sudan of the international narrative and the media narrative, and that coupled with the mass displacement of talent and youth, it just makes it really really hard for people to be able to connect with each other inside and outside Sudan. So I think one of the things that diaspora can be a really key player in is actually working to pressure to protect those who are displaced and to protect the refugees and to basically just provide more protection to them. And like you said, we have been seeing how transnational solidarity works, and we have seen it in multiple other examples and multiple other cases. So I think that's a very central role a diaspora can play, and that is also can be well connected to the challenges of being displaced because of conflict, because diaspora hold that unique situation of them being able to connect to entirely two different societies, and that is always a plus. And I know of efforts here in London. People have started, groups of the Sudanese diaspora and other UK nationals have been starting to write out to their MPs, just bringing to their attention the issue of those who are displaced from Sudan, and trying to like push forward maybe even like a family scheme like the ones that have been issued for Ukrainian refugees. And I don't think that's entirely impossible. It's just it centers us back to the issue of the politics of race, and that just um, makes us work even harder to it just because there is a politics of race. But it's not entirely impossible. And the other thing is that I believe groups here and there should be able to connect more with the people and the youth that are present on the ground in Sudan. There's a really good example of the Sudan Solidarity Fund that is being equally run between Canada and Sudan, and here in the UK and in the US as well. And so taking that one example of what people in the diaspora can do, and they can function in parallel with groups on the ground, is also possible, and not them just being functioning in isolation from those who are in Sudan. So I think the key is to just being able to replicate maybe that model of the Sudan Solidarity Fund, and being able to connect more with people on the ground should allow us to strengthen these connections and build also international and transnational solidarities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena, and thank you so much to all of our distinguished speakers for all the great insights that you have shared. We will now take some questions from our listeners. We will start with Madani, and please, request, to speak if you'd like to ask a question. Madani, please go ahead. And if I could ask you just to keep your questions as brief as possible so that we can take as many as we can while we have our speakers on the space.
Are you giving me the chance,
Hisham
Hisham?
Madani?
Yes,
Yes,
yes. Thank you
please.
very much. First, I'd like to thank you for organizing this. I think it's very important that we have such a dialogue every now and then, and see that our brothers and sisters in the neighboring countries are actually do care about the issue of Sudan. That's number one. Actually, I would like to thank Sister Lena for her excellent work in the diaspora, working towards helping um the refugees who might be coming into either Canada, as she said, and um, England, and the youth as well. I have a comment, not a question, where we all look at 1 year of the Sudan conflict. And if you allow me about a couple of minutes, I'll try to go real quick with this comment. Mr. Faisal, he sat down and he indicated that this is a war between two generals, where the international community in some spaces echoed that. But we as Sudanese look at the conflict as something, military described as an insubordination. Africa since 1960, which is the international community called it the Year of Africa, has been plagued by more than 200 um, military coup attempts and more than 17 um, insubordination. And any military observer with a political background can definitely look into what happened in Sudan, where a low ranking officer, which is the leader of the militant group RSF, committing an actual insubordination because he tried to overturn the government by taking it from a higher ranking officer. Automatically, this is called in the international community insubordination. And for the insubordination, there's actually international laws that will be triggered immediately. I can go back to it real quick, but our problem in Sudan that the media did not actually name the actual conflict in Sudan as an insubordination and ongoing military coup that we basically we were expecting, and we were totally surprised about how would they name it as a war between two generals, while we see that the Sudanese armed forces every day collect the bodies of mercenaries from other countries. We're looking for actual an important piece of it. When we report about Sudan, we have to look at the exact facts and not try to be biased towards a group or whatever it is, as Mr. Faisal indicated when he said, "Oh, if one of the parties won the war," and he basically named SAF as, you know what, if they won, we're going to have a military authoritarian government backed with extremists. And I'd like to remind Mr. Faisal, if you can listen later back on to this space, that we ousted the actual extremists in 2019 and brought him empowered. So for him to advocate and try to uh, basically spoke about an agenda, it's about extremist and Islamophobic remarks are going to be coming into Sudan again. This is an absolute wrong statement that he's making because we, the Revolutionary Guards that took the Islamic forces out, we brought him because of that. So the way that he was reporting and talking about it, I think it was misrepresenting the entire conflict in the Sudan. The second thing that I'd like to say that the ongoing humanitarian.
Hisham, if you could just keep it brief,
Yes,
please,
yes,
because
I will.
yeah.
I will definitely. I thank you very much for the opportunity. The humanitarian relief that we're looking at after 1 year, it's not caused by just the insubordination. It's also caused by having another country as external power being involved into this war, which is prolonging it, and that's what we're looking for. We want people and actual news media to look into it deeply and not listen to the reports been done by AAs or CAs. We would appreciate it if you look at the suffering from the truth cause, then find the solution. And definitely, I would agree. If you guys wanted to hold another space or something like that, I can definitely shed some lights to better educate the one that who wants to know the reality about Sudan. And I'll be more than happy to share my views with you. Thank you very much, buddy.
Thank you so much, Hisham. Appreciate it. Next, we can go to Bashir. Thank you for joining us. And here, you could speak. And until like Bashir gets the mic, I would just flag that Faisal had to leave us. He already communicated that he wouldn't be available for the entire space, so I don't. He can't respond to questions or comments directed at him. Please go ahead, Bashir.
Thank you very much, Hamid, and thank you to all the speakers, especially with amazing reveals and very sad ones at that of what's happening on the ground, but amazing work of what's happening outside. My question, it's a bit two-part, but unrelated. Number one, straight up, what can us as Sudanese men, or men in general, or boys, or males, or however you want to call yourself, do to make it better, to raise awareness better for our sisters? And number two, in terms of disarmament and looking to after this war, let's be very frank. We're seeing a bunch of young boys with weapons who are running around and doing whatever they want. There's no code of conduct. There's no communication. There's no clear line of objectives that they're doing other than terror. It's a general question to the panel. To make sure that once this conflict, inshallah, it does come to a cease fire and a cessation of hostilities, how can we make sure that the young guys who have been fighting in this are pipelined into a different industry, or to demilitarize them? That's essentially what I'm asking. How to demilitarize, how to disarm them, and how to rehabilitate them back into society. Or if anyone has any ideas of this. It's a general open one, but I'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bashir. GPO, Governance Programming Overseas. Not sure who exactly is joining on their behalf, but please ask your question. GPO.
Good evening. My name is Sarah Abdel Jalil, and I'm a member of the Governance Programming Overseas. And I was following from my other phone on my personal account, but my battery went off. So I have a comment, and I would like to thank the Africans for the Horn of Africa for this space and for the speakers, Seikha and Hala and other. I have I think there is an important part now. Sadly, we are in the second year of the conflict, about the advocacy and the solidarity in Africa. And the space is full of brothers and sisters from Africa. My question is, with all of these horrible stories that are confirmed, why a country like South Africa will welcome the RSF leader, despite standing up with Gaza, and why Rwanda will welcome the RSF leader and invite him to the museum that reflects the horrible genocides that took place. The the symbolism of just standing in solidarity with the civilians in Sudan would have at least can be applied by rejecting his visit if they cannot take him to the ICC. And therefore, the role of the civic societies, people to people support in Africa, is very important, because it's very clear that even some African countries are not supporting their African neighbors, but extending the support to the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sar. And we were hoping to have Professor Chidi, who would have been able to respond to this. He was supposed to also speak about the role of African states and also what they can do. And he could have added, obviously, some responses to this, but unfortunately, he couldn't join due to technical issues. We have two more questions or comments to take, and if you could keep it brief because we are approaching the end of our space today. Shahad and then Leila. Shahad, if you could go next, and then Leila, and then we'll go back to our panel speakers to have their final remarks. Shahad, you should be able to speak now.
Oh, thank you, Hamid. And thank you, Africans, for the Horn of Africa and esteemed guests. Thank you guys so much for this wonderful session, despite all of the horrific sentiments shared by Hala and Dr. Hala and Saiha. I don't have a question really, it's just a comment and maybe to trigger some thoughts. Like, I think entering the second year of the war and witnessing what I would say a further spread of the conflict. Now we're witnessing drone attacks, Gaddarif, Shindi, Abbara, and now further bombardments on Al Fashir and calls by the US Special Envoy calling on the warring parties for cessation of arms, I would call. I don't know, but I'm trying to maybe trigger some ideas of what can we do as Sudanese youth, Sudanese in diaspora, to do more, to advocate, to stop what's about to happen, because we know for a fact that within the next 2 weeks there will be another Al Jazeera Al Khartoum story in Al Fashir. I personally do not know, but if anyone has any ideas, the esteemed guests, we know that there will be killings, displacement that's already happening, but will be on a larger scale. There's already more than 300,000 already displaced from other locations in Al Fashir to in Darfur to Al Fashir, specifically Al Fashir town or Al Fashir locality. The situation is not looking good, but I believe that we can do better. I'm not enlightened as yet with the how, but I'm sure that there is a way that we can start. So yeah, feel free to reach to me. DMs are open if anyone has any idea beyond this session. But yeah, thank you for all of this effort. Thank you guys. Over to you, Hamid.
Thank you so much, Shahad. The last opportunity was for Leila. I'm trying to give you the right to speak, but it's not working for some reason. Can you speak, Leila?
Yes, I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, you can hear you.
Okay, thank you. This will be, I think, a very basic question because I'm still learning. I've followed Sudan for a long time, but since the division into South Sudan, sometimes when I'm reading online conversations, I'm not sure if the person is from South Sudan or Sudan. They'll say I'm Sudanese. And so I guess my question is South Sudan impacted by what is going on, and do people now identify themselves as South Sudanese? Because I'm trying to learn how to understand some of the conversations. So I'm trying to understand how people define themselves or identify themselves. So thank you. Thank you for your answer.
Sure. Thank you so much. And since this is a rather, as you mentioned, basic one, I could take it before I go back to speakers on specific questions. The independence of South Sudan happened long time ago. South Sudanese people identify as South Sudanese people, and Sudanese people identify as just Sudanese people. So most probably, when you hear someone saying they are Sudanese, it means from what is geographically the northern part of Sudan. So they're from the what is now called Sudan only. And when they say they're South Sudanese, it means that they're South Sudanese. They are impacted. South Sudan is impacted, and many of the other neighboring countries are impacted, and so on. But it is an independent country, and the people from South Sudan identify as South Sudanese. So we have three questions, basically, and I will go back to our panelists. Hal, if you could very quickly comment on what can men do to support and advocate for women who are impacted by this war? Basir's question.
Okay, so this is, first of all, I think it's very important to start defining, this war or this crisis as a protection crisis, because what's happening in Sudan at the moment, it exposed the fact that we are completely exposed to all forms of violence. We were not protected and as civilians. And first of all, Sudan lacks, apparently, it exposed the weakness of the local structure, security sector, how poor it is, how disintegrated and corrupt it is, and how ultimately it turned to be, a perpetrator and the aggressor, literally. So part of it, they were the aggressor, which is Zarb support forces, who were, part of security sector, and then part of it are they apparently lack capacity to extend any protection. So Sudanese civilians, women and girls were, and men and boys, they were quite exposed to all kind of violation that has been happening to us. So I think this is one of the worst protection crisis that happened in Africa over the past few decades. And there is so little interest. This is not a forgotten crisis. This is an intentionally neglected crisis. The fact that, what happens to Sudanese was enabled, and allowed to happen, to a large extent, many actors around Sudan, they bear the responsibility of what's happening to Sudanese people, what's happening to us, the 40 million, inhabitants of and residents of Sudan, and the 3 or 4 million refugees who are living in the country. So that's really very important. Now, to answer your question, I think it's very, very important for those who are, in the diaspora, to work on their advocacy strategies and to work on their messaging. The messages so far are rather ambiguous, I would say, and unclear. And I think it's really important when you speak about women and girls, to speak about women and girls, to quote women and girls, to speak about what happened to them, quite openly. This is what they are experiencing. This is what we are enduring, what we're all enduring, at all levels, and, when the World Health Organization, they said there is 4 million, little girls and women and little boys are exposed
to gender-based violence. And we don't have the capacity to work with sexual violence against men, but we detected cases of sexual violence against men. We detected cases of fathers who were assaulted with their own daughter. So I think it's really very important to be quite open about what we are experiencing and the fact that this is a protection crisis, and to be unapologetic about demanding protection. There is an obligation, for humanitarian aid to get into the country. There should be a level of protections that's provided, alongside cessation of hostilities. Ceasefire is not enough. Ceasefire without cessation of hostilities, it doesn't mean anything. Guns could be silent, but sexual violence could continue, looting could continue, torture could continue. So we have to demand cessation of hostilities. We have to demand civilian protections very, very clearly, and this is extremely important, even above, the emphasis on political process. Political process is important, but political process without emphasizing, the protection of civilians, without our ability to speak up and not to be afraid and not to be intimidated or threatened is critical and important. Otherwise, we are completely disregarding, the millions of us, our views and what we think about what's happening, and our voices in, in having a say in the future
Thank you, Hala.
of the country, who many of us are living in it and at the front line fighting for it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will go now to Hajer. If you could also answer the other question from Bashir about, so young people now, for lack of humanitarian protection for so many other reasons, are picking up arms and fighting and joining the fight. How could this, be resolved later? How can they get disarmed? If you could share any ideas on that.
Thank you, Hamid. Thank you, Bashir. So it's I'm pretty sure that there are specialized people regarding this that they can maybe put more strategic plans. But for me, as a culture activist, already me and my colleagues now we're working on the ground, just trying to kind of conduct culture activities, art spaces, music, art therapy, if you can say. So we're just doing it here and there to kind of people just as a reminder not to lose their life, because people are just trying to find a way what to eat and where to sleep, but they tend to forget who they really are. So now, if we're talking about disarmament, maybe we could include technical and vocational training in our long-term plans. When the war ends, hopefully soon, inshallah, we can capitalize on art therapy, maybe psychosocial support sessions. But all in all, I believe in culture. I support culture. I'm an artist myself, so using these tools, music, like art festivals, cinema, this changed the mentality. And I still believe that the culture change is more sustainable than the political change. If you get to change the mindset, if you get to show empathy and sympathy through arts and films and culture activities, this is more impactful for me than just changing governments and politics and who's leading the country. That's briefly it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hadir. And now the last question, to go back to Lena, which she had posed as a comment, and it's kind of difficult to answer, but I will pass it over to you anyway, about the role of the Sudanese diaspora, and what can they do more to stop this from getting to new places. We see the war going to more places every day and so on, and there is work done by the Sudanese diaspora, but obviously not enough. What can be done more to stop this?
Thank you, Hamid and Shahid. And to be honest, I've been thinking about this myself in the past couple of weeks. What can we do more? And obviously, I feel like our role is basically to help capture the attention of the international community, and not only that, but also to hold them accountable, because the international community always portrays itself as the guardians of human rights and democracy and peace and justice. But evidently, when there is room to action, even just by condemning or even by just talking about it, it always fails. Those who are exposed to these atrocities. So, to be honest, I'm thinking about it myself, and I feel like just being able to talk about it more, maybe, and then reaching out to MPs, reaching out to those who are in positions of power might help us. But I think that we need a huge brainstorming session, and we also need to connect more. I, for example, know that Shahd is a very excellent lawyer, and she can have all of the legal aspect of it that she could advise people with. And just if we just connected maybe more, maybe we'll be able to brainstorm and have an idea of what can we do as people in the diaspora to help maybe prevent those atrocities from happening, and offer protection like Dr. Hala was saying, and frame this whole challenge in a way that it is easily approachable and addressed by us. I know this doesn't help, but yeah, it's a work in process, and we can all unfold it together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena. Now we have come to the end of our space today. If I could just call on Dismas Nukunda, the CEO of Atrocities Watch Africa and a representative of the Africans for the Horn of Africa. If you could join us as a speaker to wrap us up today. I've invited you, but I'm not sure it's working. But if that doesn't work, we're coming to the end of our space today. I want to thank everyone, all of our speakers who shared very insightful but also very painful information about what's happening in Sudan and about the situation that is. I can hear an echo. I'm not sure if that's a problem for me or everyone is facing it. But yeah, we're wrapping up anyway. So I want to thank all of our speakers for the great insights that they shared, and I hope this goes on as one of the efforts to renew hopes that the war will end soon and to re-energize ourselves as Sudanese activists and so on, but also to appreciate support that we are getting from African brothers and sisters. And in that regard, I would also like to thank Africans for the Horn of Africa for organizing this, but also to say that this is not enough. We need more support and more solidarity from within the region, Africa, Arab countries, and others, but also globally from the world. Sudan, the world owes this to Sudan. We need all the support that we can get, and awareness and pressure, exerting pressure on global policymakers is important. So we hope with this space and more spaces to come, there will be more of that. Thank you all very much for joining us today.